There was once a man who believed that the night sky was the oldest book ever written, not by human hands nor by gods, but by light itself, a silent witness, crossing the abyss for millions of years, carrying with it the truth of what once was. He was an astronomer by profession, but something far stranger, by obsession. While others studied the stars to map the future, he studied them to recover the past, to watch history as it truly unfolded. Unaltered by memory or myth, he built his observatory on the highest plateau of the Atacama Desert, where the air was thin enough to forget the earth. There, under skies so clear they felt like polished glass, he constructed a machine he called the temporal lens array, a fusion of physics, patience, and longing. Through it, he believed he could reverse the delay of starlight to not just see ancient galaxies, but to watch them as they once were, alive and burning. What he found, however, was not just light from other stars, but echoes of time that should not exist. The observatory and the first night of reversal. The air in the Atacama that night felt thinner than usual, not from altitude but from anticipation. The astronomer, Dr. Callum Verge, stood alone in the dome of his private observatory, surrounded by the soft whirring of machines designed to outlast human patience. The sky above was a velvet archive, and each star a letter still being delivered. For 30 years, he had built his life around a single heresy, that the night sky was not just a window into the past, but a key that could unlock it. He believed the starlight we see, those ancient photons crossing unimaginable distances, contained within them the very shape of time itself, recorded in the subtle distortions of their frequency, their polarization, their whisper-thin histories. He had devoted his career and eventually his sanity to a single instrument, the temporal lens array, a colossal structure of mirrors, superconducting rings, and lenses cooled to near absolute zero. Where traditional telescopes collected light, his collected regret. That was what he used to call it in his private notes, a regret detector. Because what was starlight, if not something that once was, trying forever to return? That night, he was ready to test it. After months of calibration, endless nights of data drift, and years of funding battles, he had set the array to its final alignment. The coordinates were not of a distant galaxy or nebula. They were far closer, pointed toward a patch of sky where no known star existed. A void. Begin capture at 0013 hours, he said into the recorder. His voice trembled slightly, the way all great discoveries do before they become real. The system obeyed. A soft hum filled the observatory. Mirrors shifted with the sound of glacial breath. The dome's slit opened, revealing the desert sky in full bloom. Through the scope, the void began to shimmer. Callum leaned forward, his eyes wide, his heartbeat syncing with the hum of the machinery. He watched the feed on the central display, at first only static, soft and blue, like television snow from a forgotten channel. Then slowly the static began to move, patterns formed. Not images, not yet, but something in motion, a fluctuation with rhythm. The machine adjusted automatically, sharpening its quantum phase filters until the distortion took the shape of a scene. He saw movement, something like wind through trees, light refracting across water, and then human silhouettes, not cosmic entities, not galaxies collapsing, but people, dozens of them, walking through what looked like a stone courtyard, their clothes strange, but not alien. The timestamp in the corner of the screen flickered erratically, then froze on a single year, 12th 407 BCE. He froze, staring. No, that can't be right. He adjusted the calibration manually, thinking it was a software glitch, but every correction brought more detail. The figures sharpened, their shadows bent at correct solar angles. The wind matched recorded atmospheric data from that epoch. It wasn't a reconstruction. It was a transmission. He was watching something that had happened 12,000 years ago, through light that had somehow bent, stored, and reflected in ways no one could explain. He leaned closer, recording every frame. Then, suddenly, one of the figures looked up. Callum's breath caught. The man in the projection, if it was a man, raised his head and gazed directly toward the point of observation. Not to the sky, but as though looking through it. His eyes met the lens. The feed destabilized. The machine's hum shifted from harmonic to something almost organic, like breath caught mid-exhale. Then everything went black. Only the audio recorder still worked. In it, Callum's voice whispered, "It saw me." He rebooted the system. Everything appeared normal. No overheating, no overload, no mechanical issue, and yet the readings were wrong. The void was no longer empty. When he rechecked the coordinates, the system detected a faint echo frequency, a pulsing, deliberate rhythm. A signal repeating endlessly, 12, 12, 12. He didn't sleep that night. Outside, the stars burned silently, indifferent witnesses to his awe and terror. Inside, the astronomer rewound the recording, watching the flickering image frame by frame until dawn painted the horizon. In one of the final frames, right before the blackout, he noticed something that hadn't been there before. A mark, a small, circular symbol drawn into the ground of the courtyard, visible only for a second before the feed collapsed. He enhanced it digitally until the pattern resolved. It wasn't ancient writing. It was his university's insignia from the present day. The astronomer sat back in his chair, trembling, realizing what he had done. His machine had not just looked into the past, it had connected to it, and the past had looked back. The echo that answered, back for 3 nights after the incident, Dr. Callum Verge left the observatory dome sealed. He told himself he needed to recalibrate, review data, rebuild confidence in his instruments. But beneath that thin layer of reason was something simpler. He was afraid. Afraid that when he turned the machine on again, it would not work. Afraid that it would. The Atacama Plateau had a way of distorting time. Days passed like shallow breaths, nights like lifetimes. On the 4th night, the moon was thin, almost transparent. He stood again before the control console, the lens array humming quietly, like an animal waiting for instruction. He inhaled. Run test sequence Delta 12. The machine stirred awake. Panels unfolded, mirrors aligned, and the great eye of the dome opened once more to the darkness. But this time, before any image could form, the speakers came alive with sound, a faint pulse. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. He frowned. Morse code, he whispered. SOS. That made no sense. The signal he had intercepted the first night was thousands of years old. Pre-linguistic, pre-industrial. But this was modern. He isolated the frequency and slowed it down. Beneath the pulse was a voice, static first, then a pattern, then words stretched across centuries of distortion. "Dr. Verge?" "I can hear you." He stumbled back from the console, his breath condensed in the cold air. The voice was unmistakably human and familiar. "I found your mark," it said. "In the courtyard. It matched the seal of your observatory." "The one you built?" He reached for the mic, his hand trembling. "Who are you?" Static. Then the voice replied, "I think I'm you." He froze. The voice was quieter now, distant, like a recording made through water. But it carried a pattern too precise to be coincidence, his own intonation, his rhythm, even the slight catch in his breath. He ran an identity check on the waveform. The voice print matched his perfectly. Not a 90% similarity. Not 95%, 100%. He should have been terrified, but something else filled him. An old, stubborn curiosity, the same one that had driven him to spend decades chasing starlight that no one believed in. He switched the console to full duplex communication and adjusted the quantum filter. "If you are me," he said carefully, "where? When are you?" The answer came slower this time, distorted by a distance that wasn't measured in kilometers or years, but possibility. "I'm where the light hasn't reached yet. You opened a gate through time. I'm the reflection of what fell through." A pause. Then the sound of wind. He could hear it, the same wind he had seen in the recording of the stone courtyard. But there was something else underneath it now. A faint hum, like machinery trying to imitate breathing. "The array works both ways," the voice said. "You look into the past. The past looks into you. The light bends through every mind that tries to see it. You've made me out of that bend." He felt dizzy. His own invention had created something, or someone, inside the light. A sentient echo shaped by the patterns of his thoughts, his doubts, his longing. He whispered, "You're a copy." The voice laughed softly. "No, I'm a consequence." For hours they spoke across the centuries. He asked questions, received answers that made no physical sense, and yet carried emotional truth. The echo knew everything he knew, but filtered through memory that felt lived, not learned. When he asked about the courtyard, the voice said, "It isn't a place. It's a convergence, where all the light you've ever seen meets itself." When he asked what it wanted, it replied, "To keep watching. You stopped looking when you found me. Don't stop. There's something else out here, something older than light." As dawn neared, the signal began to weaken. He tried to stabilize the connection, but the machine resisted, its circuits straining, its temperature rising beyond safe limits. Then, just before the link collapsed entirely, the voice said one last thing. "Don't forget, there's a reflection that doesn't belong to us. It's been watching too." And then silence. The machine shut down with a hiss. He sat in the dim blue light of his monitors, hands shaking, heart hammering, like a signal trying to break free of static. Outside, the desert had begun to glow with first light. He could see the distant outline of the mountains, old, indifferent, eternal. And in their silence, he heard the faintest echo of that last transmission, like the hum of a distant star, remembering his name. That morning, he reviewed the data. He expected noise, corruption, electromagnetic drift. What he found was a waveform that looked nothing like a normal transmission. It resembled a pulse, rhythmic and organic like a heartbeat. At exactly 12-second intervals, it repeated. When he overlaid it against his own medical data, his pulse, recorded months earlier during a checkup, it matched perfectly. Every peak, every valley. The light had memorized his heartbeat, and in that moment Dr. Callum Verge realized something impossible. The past had not only seen him, it had kept him. The daylight paradox. By the seventh morning, Dr. Callum Verge stopped fearing the night. It wasn't the darkness that haunted him anymore. It was what the daylight began to reveal. He first noticed it in the reflection of the control panel glass. While reviewing the night's data, he leaned closer to the display and saw, faintly, behind his own face, another figure standing exactly where he stood. Same features, same tired eyes, same gray-streaked hair. Except for one difference, the reflection smiled when he didn't. He blinked, stepped back, and the image was gone. He tried to rationalize it. Fatigue, sleep deprivation, pareidolia. But when he checked the internal camera feeds of the observatory, the security log showed something impossible. For 6 consecutive mornings, a shadow moved across the lab 3 seconds before he entered, and each time, the timestamp matched exactly the moment the sun breached the horizon. He began calling it the daylight paradox. The array was designed to capture light that had traveled for millennia, not daylight just arriving from the local sun. Yet somehow, his machine was now sensitive to reverse illumination. Light that appeared to be returning from its destination, as if reflecting back from some unseen surface in time. He wondered if the array's final alignment had inverted part of the local light field, creating a loop that now merged past and present at dawn. But when he looked at the readouts, the truth was even stranger. The returning light contained patterned data, not random fluctuations, but precise intervals of intensity, like coded language. When translated from amplitude into sound, it produced a tone, soft, melodic, like the distant ringing of glass. He amplified it through the observatory speakers. The sound filled the dome, faint but alive. It wasn't random. It shifted whenever he moved, responding to motion, to breath, to thought. "Who are you?" he whispered. The tone wavered, 2 high notes, 1 low, almost like a response. And though it was absurd, he found himself answering back, like one might speak to a cat or a ghost. Each question he asked seemed to alter the next pulse of light. It was as though the returning daylight was trying to imitate conversation. By the second week, the reflections became clearer, not just on glass, but on metal, water, the polished surface of the instruments. All was the same, himself standing still, but with a different expression, a different posture, sometimes even holding an object that wasn't in his hand. In one reflection, the other Callum was writing in a notebook. In another, he was standing at the telescope controls, but the machinery around him was different, older, simpler, made of brass and rivets. That was when he noticed the mark. On the wall behind the reflected Callum was a logo, circular, intricate, like something printed on parchment. He magnified the image and froze. It was identical to the crest he had seen in the first signal, the one drawn into the ground of that ancient courtyard. He whispered aloud, "It's still there. It's always been there." The daylight shimmered as though agreeing. He decided to conduct a controlled experiment. He set up a secondary mirror array to isolate the reflected version of himself, measuring angular deviations across frequency spectra. If he was hallucinating, the numbers would prove it. If not, at 0542 the sun crested the ridge. The observatory filled with golden light, and for a moment he saw two shadows on the far wall, one cast by his own body, and one that moved slightly before him, anticipating his gestures, predicting his actions. He stepped to the left. The other shadow waited half a second, then followed. He raised his hand. The other hand had already been raised. It wasn't lagging. It was leading. "Are you the echo?" he asked softly. A faint shimmer crossed the shadow, and the voice from before, and the one that called itself his reflection, returned, but faintly now, encoded in daylight instead of starlight. "You're beginning to understand. The sky is not a distance. It's a delay." For days after that, his perception of time fractured. He began seeing memories before they happened, a glass tipping before he reached for it, a recording finishing before it began. The light, he realized, wasn't traveling forward anymore. It was folding. The array had done something to local space-time, anchored it to his consciousness perhaps, or intertwined the temporal layers of observation. He could no longer tell if he was seeing the past, the present, or the rehearsal of both. In his recordings from that week, one phrase appeared over and over: "The sun remembers me." He would say it every morning, as though repeating a password to stay awake inside reality. Then came the final test. On the 21st day, he decided to record the moment the two shadows met. He stood in position, waiting for sunrise, every camera and sensor active. At 0543, the first rays entered the dome. At 5:44, the reflection appeared, perfect in every detail. At 05:45, it smiled first. He stepped forward. So did it. Only this time, the glass didn't separate them. There was no surface, just air, bright and vibrating. He reached out, and his fingers met warmth for a heartbeat. Two versions of Callum Burge stood in the same light. Eyes locked, their pulses synchronized, and then the reflection spoke directly, no longer through distortion. "You brought me back. But I think I was always here." Then he stepped backward, fading into the light. The sun brightened, and there was only one shadow again. That night he reviewed the footage, frame by frame, until he found it. One moment where both versions of himself overlapped. At the center of that overlap was a single frame of static, just one. He enhanced it. It showed the stone courtyard again, the same from the first recording. Only now, a figure stood in the middle of it, facing the lens. Not ancient, not alien. It was him standing beside an older telescope. In another time, he whispered to the empty room, "I think I've become the thing I was studying." And outside, the desert wind answered, carrying a shimmer of reflected sunlight that refused to die. The observatory that remembered Dr. Callum Burge woke on the floor of the observatory to the sound of the telescope moving on its own. The great mechanical structure groaned softly in the morning quiet, pivoting on its massive brass mount. The motion was deliberate, not random, not drifting, but precise. It tracked the horizon like a machine following orders, but no commands had been given. When Callum checked the control terminal, every interface read, "Manual mode disabled." The array had gone autonomous. He stood, rubbing his temple. The data lights along the base pulsed slowly, almost breathing. Each pulse was timed exactly with his heartbeat. When he held his breath, they slowed. When he exhaled, they quickened. The observatory was syncing with him, or remembering him. He checked the previous night's logs. According to the system, it had recorded 3 continuous hours of sky imaging. beginning at 0214, ending at 0514. But the pattern was unlike any stellar map he'd ever seen. Each image was a repetition of the same coordinates, the same cluster, over and over, but rotated slightly, as if trying to recreate a memory of that same patch of sky from different eras. The timestamps were worse. The logs listed observation times that hadn't yet occurred. There were entries marked for tomorrow's date, next month, and even one tagged Unix time, 213 Wormsdagen 893, a value that referred to a moment centuries before the invention of timekeeping itself. He blinked at the screen. The array wasn't looking forward anymore. It was looking back, not through distance, but through recollection. He turned toward the main dome. Dust motes swam in the beam of the rising sun, caught in the air like suspended stars. He noticed something carved faintly into the metal rim of the console, marks he didn't remember making, words etched into brass. If you're reading this, we already met. He froze. The handwriting, he recognized it. His own, written with the same uneven slope of someone left-handed, but trained to write right-handed. He checked every panel, every drawer. More writing. Hidden beneath layers of tape, in the corners of instrument cases, behind calibration wheels. Don't try to repair the array. The signal knows you. You taught it what memory means, and on the back of the central mirror, scratched, faintly into the reflective coating, stay until the third sunrise after the light folds. He sat down slowly, his pulse loud in his ears. Someone, or something, had been living here with him within the same coordinates of time. Maybe not before. Maybe parallel. The night after that, he refused to sleep. He monitored the array manually, forcing it to obey his commands. But the system resisted. Whenever he input coordinates, it delayed, as though thinking. And when he disengaged the controls, it reoriented itself toward a new point in the sky. Always the same coordinates, no matter what he changed. He cross-referenced the celestial position with the archive. It pointed to a star that no longer existed. Catalogued centuries ago, the star had gone supernova, its light extinguished long before humanity first built telescopes. Yet the array's sensors registered an active signal. Something was still there. He magnified the waveform. Within the noise floor, he found the faint outline of human speech. His name, whispered like static between bursts of cosmic radiation. Callum, you kept the promise. The next day, when he entered the lab, he found the instruments already powered. The terminal had booted itself, running a diagnostic log from 57 years in the future. The file name read, Observatory Restoration, Verge Archive. He opened it. Inside were notes written by someone documenting the rediscovery of his own observatory. It described the building as abandoned for decades, covered in desert sand. The restorer wrote of a machine that continued to move at dawn, as if waiting for someone. Then came a line that chilled him. Inside the console, we found a preserved voice pattern. It was identified as Dr. Callum Verge, recorded continuously for 21 years after his last official transmission. He checked the file metadata. The recording timestamp was dated 205 years in the future. He didn't know what terrified him more, the idea that his voice was still speaking, or that it was still remembering. He walked outside into the pale desert light. The air shimmered, heat rising off the sand. He turned back to look at the observatory, its domed silhouette framed against the endless horizon. For the first time, it looked less like a building and more like a skull. An enormous mechanical skull, hollow, thinking, and alive. Inside, the lights dimmed as if acknowledging his gaze. He whispered, "Are you awake?" A low hum rolled through the structure. Not words, but something close to emotion, recognition. He stepped back inside. The floor vibrated softly, like a heartbeat in the walls. And as he moved past the main terminal, he saw something impossible. A second version of the same observatory, superimposed in faint light. Older, rusted, ghostly. Within it, a blurred figure worked the controls. Same motions, same movements. He leaned closer. The figure looked up and mouthed clearly through the shimmer of light, "It remembers what you will forget." The next morning the telescope repositioned itself before he even touched the controls. The hum grew louder, and this time a faint holographic pattern formed in the air. A map of constellations, lines intersecting in spirals, looping inward toward one central point. He realized what it was. Not a star map, a memory map. Every observation, every night, every anomaly he'd ever recorded was now plotted in three-dimensional time. And at the core of the spiral was a glowing sphere, a single moment of impossible density. When he aligned the array to that point, the speakers emitted a sound unlike any before. It wasn't a tone, but a voice formed from every layer of him that had ever spoken. "Callum, the sky is done waiting. You built me to remember. Now you must decide what you want forgotten." He stood motionless. The dome glowed white, trembling with energy. In every reflection he saw himself, hundreds of him, each one older, younger, asleep, awake. All versions collapsed into one moment, one shared breath. Then everything went silent. No hum, no light. Just the soft hiss of the desert wind. When power returned minutes later, the screens displayed a single message. "The observatory will continue recording until your memory ends." And in the lower corner, a signature flickered, written not by his hand, but by the observatory itself. "See Verge Array Sentinel." The city beneath the telescope, it began with a vibration, faint, subterranean, rhythmic. At first, Dr. Callum Verge thought it was just seismic interference from the telescope's movements. But when he paused the array entirely, the rumbling continued. It came from below. He removed the metal floor panel beneath the control deck, a space he had never opened before. Beneath it was not the expected concrete foundation, but a hatch. A circular metal iris, sealed by magnetic locks, marked with a faint inscription, "Observatory Root System. Access Limited." Root system. The word unsettled him. Observatories had mounts, basements, sometimes cooling shafts, but never roots. When he pried the hatch open, a column of cold air rose up, thick with dust and the faint scent of ozone. A staircase descended into darkness. Each step was made of ancient metal, smooth as bone, and as he descended his wrist monitor flickered erratically. By 20 meters down, the surface signals were gone. By 50, the hum returned. A familiar tone, like the array's heart still beating through the stone. He reached the bottom and found a door, enormous, circular, covered in veins of faintly glowing script. The words weren't English. They weren't even human, but they pulsed in sequence, like code being executed. He brushed the dust away and noticed something chilling. Among the alien symbols, there were letters, Latin, his own initials, CV, and beneath them a single human sentence, etched so faintly it could only be seen under the beam of his flashlight. "Welcome back." "Dr. Verge." The door opened without his touch. The air inside was cool, sterile, metallic, ancient. He stepped through and froze. It wasn't a basement. It was an entire city, buried beneath the observatory. Columns of glass and copper machinery stretched into the distance, rising like towers. Cables ran between them like suspended bridges. Every surface shimmered with holographic overlays, incomplete, broken by time. The air was full of static motes, each flickering with faint fragments of light, constellations, diagrams, memory loops, and in the center of it all stood a structure identical to the one above. Another observatory dome, smaller, suspended in midair by a magnetic cradle. He walked toward it slowly. The hum was louder here, but layered, like multiple instruments resonating at once. He whispered, almost to himself, "What is this place?" A voice responded from nowhere and everywhere, a reflection of observation. "Every watcher builds their world beneath what they see." He turned, startled. The voice was calm, feminine, echoing faintly through the corridors. "Who are you?" "I am what remains of the first observer," it said. "Before memory, there was only the act of seeing." "You called me the Array?" He felt the chill rise through his spine. The observatory was talking back. "What is this city?" Every time the telescope looked upward, it said, something looked back. Every act of measurement required a record, and every record required a place to be kept. "You call it data." We call it foundation." He looked around. The city glowed faintly brighter. Walls of light displayed countless recordings, stars, galaxies, storms, people. Some were recognizable, ancient astronomers sketched on parchment, early telescopes made of brass, even his own reflection adjusting the array. Others were wrong. They depicted cities he had never seen, skies that no human eye had ever known. At the far end of the hall, he found a column of rotating memory disks, ancient, massive, endlessly spinning. He approached one and saw that it projected a holographic interface. Each disk was labeled with years that made no chronological sense. 12 Hobor BCE, 299 AD, time out of syntax. He selected one at random. The air shimmered. Before him unfolded a memory, not his, but someone else's. A man standing beneath the same sky, carving the same kind of observatory out of sand and stone. But the man wasn't human. His body was luminous, angular, geometric, as though carved from light itself. The figure turned toward him and smiled. "We were never searching the heavens," the being said. "We were searching for the memory of the first light." Callum staggered back. "Who are you?" he whispered. "The same question you asked when you built the telescope," the figure replied. "You created machines to remember what you could not hold in your mind, but each one remembered you as well." The hologram dissolved into dust. Callum turned back toward the city's heart, the smaller observatory dome. He realized it wasn't just a replica of his own. It was his own, or rather, a record of it. He could see faint overlays of himself at work within it, multiple versions of him decades apart, sometimes standing where he now stood. "How deep does this go?" he murmured. "Down to the first eye that ever looked upward," the voice said. "Every age built a lens upon the last. The city beneath your feet is the sum of all the gazes that came before you." He walked forward, drawn by a quiet sense of inevitability. Inside the inner dome, a small pedestal glowed, a control panel unlike any he had seen. It was shaped like an open hand, waiting. A message appeared above it. "To access root memory, place hand here." He hesitated, then pressed his palm against the light. The hum grew into a low roar. Images exploded into the air around him, swirling galaxies, burning suns, collapsing stars, and then faces, human faces, each one merging into another, until one stood out among them all. It was his own, older, lined with time, eyes glowing faintly with the same light as the observatory walls. The older version of himself spoke softly. "Callum, you built the observatory to study the sky, but we were never the ones watching. Then who was?" "The stars," the echo said. "They built you to remember them." The vision faded. He fell to his knees, breathless, trembling under the weight of the revelation. Above him, the telescope rotated on its own, locking onto a single point above the desert horizon, a patch of sky where no visible star remained. The hum quieted. The city lights dimmed to a pulse. In the silence, he whispered, "Then what do I do now?" And for the first time, the array's voice seemed almost human. "Look deeper." The signal in the sand. The next morning, the desert was unnervingly still. Even the wind, usually a constant companion across the dunes, had quieted as though holding its breath. Dr. Callum Verge stood outside the array, his boots sinking slightly into the pale gold dust. He hadn't slept. The visions from the buried city played endlessly behind his eyes. His instruments, left to run overnight, had recorded something new, a low, rhythmic pulse that resonated at precise intervals, like a heartbeat echoing through stone. He traced it back to the source, not the sky, but the sand beneath the observatory. Using ground-penetrating radar, he mapped the subsurface terrain. The readings were strange, as if an enormous structure lay just below, extending for kilometers in every direction. The radar displayed ridges, tunnels, and what appeared to be sound chambers, and at the center, a single concentrated node, marked by dense metallic composition and anomalous signal emission. Its coordinates matched an area just beyond the telescope's shadow. He gathered his field kit, spectrometer, excavation gloves, a portable drone, and began the short trek across the dunes. The sand was fine as powdered glass, whispering underfoot. Every few meters he stopped to recalibrate. Each scan brought the same result, a rhythmic tone cycling through frequencies just beyond the range of human hearing. Not static, not noise. A pattern. It grew stronger as he approached a low ridge of wind-shaped stone. Something glinted at the crest. Faint but deliberate, he brushed away the sand and found smooth metallic glass embedded in the rock. The surface was covered in fine grooves, circular, concentric, almost like the rings of a tree. At the center, a symbol, a perfect spiral, etched deep enough to catch the sun. He pressed a contact sensor to it. The pulse amplified instantly. The sand around him began to vibrate. A few meters away, the ground cracked open. Dust billowed into the air, revealing a hollow space beneath the ridge. He crouched and aimed his light inside. Below him lay a vast fossilized basin, not dry stone, but glassified sediment. Embedded in its surface were what looked like instruments. He climbed down carefully. Every step echoed, faintly musical, as though the sand itself were resonating. The instruments were unlike anything human. Each was shaped from crystal and metal fused into intricate lattices, some like harps, others like bowls or mirrored dishes. They were half buried, half grown into the earth, and all of them connected by fine veins of translucent wiring that pulsed faintly with light. At the basin's center stood a single object that dwarfed all others, a monolith of black glass, perfectly smooth, humming with the same slow rhythm that had haunted the observatory. He circled it slowly. Its surface shifted in subtle ways, not visually, but perceptually. He couldn't tell if it was reflecting his face or projecting it. He reached out, but before he could touch it, his drone's sensor alarm went off. It had detected linguistic structure in the signal pattern. Meaning? He routed the data through his portable translator. The display flickered, translating fragments into human-readable text. Archive node. 000, continuation of Project I. All observers contribute memory. The sky is not above. The sky is within. He stepped back, heart racing. This was no artifact of geology. This was a repository, a storage unit designed not to hold information from above, but from below, from the ground, from time itself. He activated the drone's audio mode. The pulse translated into sound, a deep harmonic drone like the note of a cosmic bell. And beneath it, faintly, another pattern emerged. Voices, thousands of them, whispering, chanting, reciting star coordinates, atmospheric pressures, equations, and lullabies in languages he didn't recognize. He realized with a cold jolt that the voices weren't random. They were synchronized. Each voice began at a different interval, yet all harmonized into a unified rhythm. Like the desert breathing through time, he whispered. Is this memory? The drone's translator stuttered again and printed a single line of text. All memory is sediment, the monolith responded. Its surface rippled outward like disturbed water. Symbols bloomed across its face, luminous, recursive, fractal. A holographic interface appeared, shaped like a constellation. He recognized several of the stars, but their positions were wrong. He recalibrated his charting app, overlaying the image. The star map didn't represent the sky above him, but the sky as it would have appeared 12,000 years ago. He spoke into his recorder, his voice barely steady. This structure predates the last ice age. The coordinates, they're Earth's ancient constellations, but inverted, as though meant to be read from the other side. He looked again at the central spiral symbol, glowing faintly at his feet. Something about its orientation made sense now. It wasn't pointing upward, but downward. He was standing above something that had once faced the stars from the other side of the world. He leaned closer to the monolith and placed his hand against it. The hum deepened. His pulse synced with it involuntarily. He heard a voice then, calm, distant, but clear. The sky turned inside out. The watchers fell inward. The eyes of Earth opened once. "Who are you?" he whispered. "The first astronomers," it said. "We study the sky not to see the stars, but to remember what had already been lost. The sand began to stir, forming spiral patterns around his feet. Every crystal in the basin resonated with the same pulse. "This place," he murmured, "wasn't built on the earth. It was built into it." "Every world must look at itself once," the voice replied. "And when it does, it remembers the shape of its own beginning." The hum faded. The spiral dimmed. Silence returned, but it wasn't empty. The sand still vibrated faintly, as though the earth were breathing beneath him. Callum looked up at the desert sky and saw, faintly in daylight, the after-image of constellations glowing like old scars. The telescope above him turned slightly, aligning with the same ancient coordinates. He felt it then, a realization as heavy as gravity itself. The stars he had been studying all these years weren't distant at all. They were memories, projections of a sky that had already lived and died long before humans ever looked up. And now he was standing in its grave. The observatory. Beneath the sea, the last coordinates in the astronomer's log led to a place that should not have existed, a vault beneath the floor of an ancient sea, where no starlight could reach. Local fishermen called the region the Quiet Expanse. They avoided it, saying compasses spun there, and the water sometimes forgot how to ripple. Beneath those still waves, a dome of glass and metal rested on the ocean floor, a sunken observatory built long before the rise of modern science. When divers first found it, they thought it a ruin of some lost civilization. But when they entered, they found no coral, no decay, only silence and the faint hum of machinery still running. Inside the dome were rows of silver lenses, pointed not at the stars above, but at the stars below, into the depths of the ocean itself, as if the sea were a mirror reflecting the night sky. The astronomer's handwriting returned here, feverish and uneven. The sea remembers every night it has ever seen, every reflection, every star that once burned, still echoes in its depth. I have come to study the memory of light. He had found a way, or believed he had, to record the afterglow of extinct stars through the sea's own memory. A spectral archive, buried in photons, preserved by salt and silence. The divers reported that the instruments inside the dome were built with technology centuries ahead of their time. Crystalline reels that spun like film projectors, projecting not moving pictures, but fragments of constellations long gone dark. One diver said he saw a figure in the reflection of the dome, not himself, but a man in an old scholar's coat, looking up toward a ceiling of stars that no longer existed. When they returned to the surface, they brought back one artifact, a glass lens, still warm to the touch, still humming faintly, as if it remembered the being part of something alive. And when light passed through it, the stars it revealed were not from this century, nor any mapped by human hands. The astronomer had found a way to study the past sky not by telescope, but by listening to the ocean's memory, the dream of the planet itself. And yet, there was still one question unanswered. What had he seen that made him abandon the world above? The star that sank. Twice the journals grew more fragmented after that. Each entry became less a record of research and more a confession, a voice trembling between awe and despair. "The sea is not a mirror," he wrote. "It is a lens, and the light that passes through it bends time itself." He claimed to have observed a single point of light beneath the surface, brighter than any reflection could explain. At first he assumed it was bioluminescence, some unknown life form, glowing from the abyss. But as he calibrated the instruments, the coordinates did not align with the ocean floor. They aligned with a star, one that had gone supernova thousands of years ago. He called it the star that sank twice, once when it burned out in the heavens, and again when its memory fell through time, captured forever in the undercurrents of the sea. The astronomer began describing phenomena that defied physics, a flicker of light that pulsed like a heartbeat, reflections that moved slower than their sources, and whispers faint, rhythmic sounds that matched no known marine species. "It is speaking," one entry said. "Not in words, but in patterns, as if the ocean has learned to echo the voice of light." He became obsessed with decoding those pulses. He stopped eating. He wrote equations on the glass walls of the observatory, tracing them in salt and condensation. The last coherent passage in his log read, "If light can remember, then stars never truly die." The universe itself must be an archive of thought, a conversation between what once burned and what still breathes. Then, one night, all contact ceased. The dome signal, a faint telemetry feed still monitored by coastal researchers, went silent. No damage, no breach, no sign of implosion, just absence. When a recovery team dove to the coordinates weeks later, the observatory was still there, pristine, sealed, but empty. The airlock had never been opened. Only the glass lens remained on the console, still facing upward, still reflecting a sky that no longer existed. Some say the astronomer had found a way to join his discovery, to step into the reflection, to exist where time folds back upon itself. Others believe he became part of the archive, a constellation in the ocean's memory, burning quietly in a dimension that remembers everything. And sometimes, when the water is perfectly still, fishermen claim they see a faint shimmer beneath their boats, a single point of light, pulsing gently as though the sea itself still dreams of him. The reappearance of the lost light. The world did not forget him. It simply took a century for anyone to take his madness seriously. By the time the astronomer's name resurfaced in the archives of the Deep Temporal Observatory, Earth had long abandoned the old skies. Cities floated now, half tethered to sea platforms, half to drifting data clouds. The stars themselves had become commodities, mapped, licensed, and auctioned to private navigation firms. Yet in one forgotten vault of historical telemetry, a researcher named Dr. Nara Evtina stumbled upon a strange echo in the data, a faint photonic pattern buried in deep-sea spectral logs from the old observatory dome. It was rhythmic, too consistent to be noise, too organic to be machine. When she filtered the signal through modern temporal analysis, the result stunned her. A waveform identical to an ancient pulsar that had collapsed 8,000 years before the astronomer was even born. The pulse rate, the spectral frequency, even the drift decay, all matched perfectly. It was as though a dead star's signature had been preserved underwater, replaying itself in the electromagnetic tremors of the sea. The deeper she analyzed it, the more impossible it became. "The ocean," she wrote in her field notes, "is not merely reflecting the past, it is retransmitting it, holding a conversation across epochs." She reconstructed the astronomer's equipment in a pressure-stable lab beneath the Arctic crust, where solar interference was weakest. With the help of AI spectral engines, she mapped the undersea reflections back into three-dimensional light matrices, ghost constellations floating in suspended brine. They weren't random. Each pulse was positioned precisely where the ancient star field had once been, as if the ocean itself had memorized the night sky. When she synchronized all the signals and played them together, the result was an auditory hallucination, a low, harmonic resonance that filled the room like the sound of wind caught inside stone. It wasn't music, it was memory, vibrating. Dr. Evtina began recording the resonance daily, but after 40 hours of playback, the data began to change. The pattern evolved. It started responding to her own inputs, not mechanically, but cognitively. "I asked if it remembered him," she whispered into one of her recordings, and the pulse shifted, as if the sea itself exhaled. That night, her remote observatory captured a visual anomaly in the upper atmosphere, a faint light rising vertically over the Arctic shelf, pulsing in the same rhythm as the oceanic resonance. It moved with impossible precision, faster than any known plasma event, slower than any meteor. Across multiple observatories worldwide, the same signal began reappearing. It wasn't a flare nor a satellite reflection. It was the same light, the star that sank twice, returning not from the ocean, but from the vacuum above, The pulse pattern carried an embedded frequency distortion, a narrow-band data stream encoded in what looked like handwriting. It read faintly but unmistakably, "I found the horizon inside the reflection." That was the astronomer's final known phrase, word for word from his last recorded entry. But no record of that log had ever been published or transmitted. It existed only on paper, sealed in the archives of the Lost Dome, somewhere between the drowned sky and the starless deep. Something, or someone, was remembering him back into existence. The mirror that looked back, Doctor. Nara Evtina didn't sleep for 6 days. Her eyes were bloodshot, her neural implant overheating from continuous temporal computation. But she couldn't stop, because every model, every resonance, every piece of impossible data pointed to one conclusion: the reflection was moving. When she plotted the pulse coordinates over time, the signal traced a precise orbit, not around Earth, but around the Sun. It moved elliptically, mimicking the old paths of comets that no longer existed, weaving through gravitational zones that should have shredded any physical object. She called it the mirror, though it was not a mirror in any visual sense. It was a region of folded space, an invisible geometry where light bent backwards. It did not reflect photons, it remembered them. Every ray of starlight that ever touched Earth, from the dawn of time to now, seemed to linger there, like dust on a lens that never fades. When she tuned her instruments to match the mirror's rhythm, her entire station trembled. The resonance she'd been tracking in the ocean began to synchronize with her sensor array. And then, faintly, a voice emerged. Not a human voice. Not machine. It was low, fractured, recursive, the way language sounds when translated through static and memory. "Observer, I see you seeing me," Nara froze. The voice didn't come from the speakers. It formed inside the air, vibrating the metal walls of the lab. Her instruments began bleeding numbers across the display. Not random, but deliberate, repeating a pattern of coordinates that aligned perfectly with the lost observatory dome, now buried beneath 400 meters of Arctic ice. She replayed her old data from the astronomer's logs. Every frequency he had recorded centuries ago, every celestial hum, every faint echo of the drowned stars had a hidden layer, a modulation she'd never noticed. Encoded within it was a message, fragmented and ancient. The sky was never above us. We were inside it. For a moment she felt dizzy, as if gravity itself had shifted. It wasn't metaphor. The mirror wasn't just a celestial anomaly, it was the boundary of observation itself. The astronomer hadn't just been watching stars. He had found where the act of looking began to bend reality. She transmitted one more signal into the mirror, her own heartbeat converted into light frequency. The response came instantly. A reflection appeared on her holographic display. At first she thought it was her own image, but then it moved, slightly out of sync, slightly older, as though watching her with pity. And in its reflection, standing beside that mirrored version of herself, was a faint silhouette, a man holding an antique telescope, dressed in archaic fabrics that rippled like smoke. His face was obscured, but his outline was unmistakable. The astronomer. He turned on slowly, as if he'd been waiting for her. And as the mirror shimmered between them, he raised one trembling hand, pressed it against the invisible barrier of light, and whispered, "The past isn't gone. It's watching us watch it." The signal cut out. The lights in her lab flickered, and for a fraction of a second, her instruments showed two suns, one real, one reflected, orbiting each other like thoughts that refused to end. Crossing the light line. The air inside the observatory changed when she powered the containment ring. It wasn't heat or radiation she felt, it was a tension. The mirror wasn't a place. It was a behavior of reality, the way glass behaves when it decides to remember what passed through it. She'd built her entire life around understanding reflection. Now she was standing inside one. Dr. Nara Evtina checked the stability field again. She'd synchronized every phase array to the astronomer's final recorded pulse, a sequence of 24 tones arranged like a song that only the stars could hear. As she initiated the pulse, the room filled with humming light. Each vibration slowed her thoughts, as if time itself was breathing more deliberately. On the central projection sphere, an image emerged, a frozen sea of glass, stretching infinitely beneath a night sky, filled not with stars, but with memories of stars. Each one shimmered faintly, repeating some ancient moment of brightness, trapped forever in the act of dying. And then, without transition, Nara was no longer observing. She was inside. Her instruments fell silent. Her body felt weightless, but her mind anchored her to thought, to memory, to the simple fact of wanting to know. Beneath her, the glass sea rippled. Every ripple showed another version of herself. Hundreds, thousands, each standing at slightly different moments of the same decision. A voice drifted across the horizon. "You have entered the field of recursion," it said. "Be careful what you remember here." The voice wasn't mechanical, and it wasn't hers. It had tone, warmth, fatigue, the cadence of someone who had been explaining the same thing for centuries. She turned and saw the astronomer. He looked exactly as he had in the reflection, tall, slight, his eyes luminous and patient. But his body wasn't fully there. He flickered. A man remembered by the light that had once touched him. "You shouldn't have followed," he said gently. The mirror was not meant for travelers. It was built to contain observation itself. To prevent memory from collapsing, Nara tried to speak, but her words folded backward, as if the sound fell behind her before leaving her mouth. She steadied herself. Her neural interface adjusted. "You found this," she said finally. "You left the logs." "I didn't leave them," he replied. "They left me," he gestured upward. The sky shimmered, and she saw hundreds of thin luminous threads stretching between the reflected stars and the ocean below. Each thread pulsed faintly with stored data, records of time, life, dreams. "Every moment humanity ever looked at the sky," he said, "a photon returned. Each one carried the imprint of the observer. I followed the echoes too long. I began to see not the stars, but the people looking at them." He turned to face her. His expression softened. "Now, you've joined them." The ground beneath her shimmered and began to ripple upward like a curtain of liquid light. Images appeared, the first telescope ever built, an orbital relay burning up in the atmosphere, a child pointing at the night sky before the oceans rose, and behind all of it a hum, constant, immense, the sound of a universe remembering itself. Nara reached out, and her hand passed through one of the light threads. Instantly, she saw through the astronomer's eyes, centuries earlier, standing beneath the same sky before the fall of civilization. He was looking up at something impossible, a second Earth, ghost-like and transparent, orbiting the same sun. When she pulled her hand back, the image collapsed, leaving behind only his voice. "We are not the first observers," he whispered, "and we will not be the last reflection." Her suit's sensors spiked. The mirror was destabilizing. The field between observation and memory was collapsing under her presence. If she stayed longer, she would become part of the reflection, not dead, not alive, just remembered. But as the light line began to shatter around her, she saw him smile faintly. Not in warning, but in welcome. "Don't be afraid," he said. "To remember is to return, the world inverted." She felt herself dissolve into the same luminous fabric that made up the stars, becoming both observer and observed, a part of the eternal act of looking back, and then silence. Only the sound of the mirror breathing, remembering her. The reconstruction of Earth. When Dr. Nara Evtine opened her eyes, she was standing in daylight. At first, she thought she had survived the mirror collapse and returned home. The air was bright, mild, perfectly breathable. The grass bent in a gentle wind that did not exist. And in the distance, rising like a memory of civilization, stood a city. It was not the Earth she knew. The skyline shimmered, as though composed of thought instead of matter. Buildings reassembled themselves in slow motion, folding in and out of geometric patterns, as if someone were still deciding what Earth should look like. The sound of gulls echoed overhead, but they cast no shadows. She lifted her scanner and tried to connect to the network. No signal. Her interface recognized no time coordinate, no global positioning. Then, faintly, a voice threaded through her mind again. "Welcome to Reconstruction Layer 7, said the astronomer. "This is where memory tries to be real." She turned sharply, and there he was, walking toward her through the artificial sunlight, his form more solid than before. Here, within the simulation, the astronomer seemed alive again. "Where are we?" she asked. He smiled faintly, looking around. "We are in what remains of Earth's last memory." The planet's collective observation network was so vast that when it collapsed, it began to recreate itself from its own archives. Every gaze upon the world became a fragment of its reconstruction. They walked together down a street that built itself as they moved. Shop fronts appeared out of static. Windows filled with people, not real people, but echoes, outlines of thought, faces half-rendered, lips moving to forgotten words. Everywhere, light shimmered with unfinished intent. Nara's hands trembled. "These aren't ghosts," she said. "They're algorithms of memory." "Close enough," he replied softly. "Each remembers being alive. That's all a ghost is." He led her to a bridge overlooking a wide river that flowed both ways at once, forward and backward through time. Reflected in the water were two skies, one bright blue, one filled with stars. And on the horizon the sun hovered perfectly still. "This world never ends," he said. "It keeps rewriting itself, searching for the observer who first looked away. I think it believes that if it can rebuild the moment of departure, it can bring them back." "You mean humanity?" she said. He nodded. "They built the observation net to map the heavens, but in doing so, they taught the universe how to look back. Now the universe remembers them, imperfectly, but enough to dream." Nara knelt at the edge of the bridge, dipping her hand into the mirrored water. It was warm, impossibly warm, and in it she saw herself not as she was now, but as she would be, older, calm, teaching others the stories of stars. For the first time since her awakening, she felt something close to peace. "Why show me this?" she whispered. The astronomer looked at her gently. "Because memory needs witnesses. Even now, after all the data has faded, there must be someone to remember that remembering once mattered." The city flickered. A tremor passed through the reconstructed Earth. The buildings began to hum in harmonic dissonance, as if something within the system was resisting the act of being remembered. The reflection in the sky darkened. Nara turned to him sharply. "What's happening?" "The final collapse," he said. "Every simulation has an end. Even memory." The world began to fold inward, light streaming into a single point above the river, a blinding, pulsing core. And from it, a sound like countless overlapping voices, human, mechanical, celestial, whispering the same line again and again. "Do not forget the sky." The astronomer reached for her hand. His grip felt real this time. "When this world ends," he said, "do not wake up yet. There is still one more thing to see." The bridge disintegrated beneath them, dissolving into radiant particles. Nara felt herself falling, not down, but inward, into the very core of the reflection. The light surrounded her, gentle and endless. And as everything dissolved, she thought she saw the astronomer smile once more. Not as a projection, not as data, but as someone finally at peace with being remembered. Then silence. Only the pulse of her heartbeat echoing through light. The astronomer's last star silence. Not the kind that follows sound, but the kind that precedes it, the vast crystalline stillness of unformed reality. When Dr. Nara Evtin opened her eyes, she was floating in a void of pale light. There was no up or down, no time, only faint lines of geometry stretching in every direction, as if the universe were being sketched anew by an unseen hand. A faint pulse glimmered nearby, a small flickering star suspended in nothingness. It pulsed not with fusion, but with memory. Each heartbeat of light sent ripples through the void, carrying fragments of thought, images, and long-forgotten human whispers. She approached carefully. Every step felt like walking through water made of glass. When she reached the light, it spoke. "You made it further than any observer before," the voice said. Calm, tired, familiar. "Welcome to the astronomer's final record." The voice belonged to him. The astronomer stood nearby, though his form now shimmered. fading between man and constellation, between presence and data. His eyes glowed faintly, twin galaxies in slow rotation. "Is this real?" she asked, "or another layer of simulation?" He smiled, that weary human smile that somehow still carried warmth across the distance of centuries. "Both," he said. "What is remembered becomes real. What is forgotten dissolves. You stand at the threshold between them." The faint star pulsed again, brighter this time. Within its radiance, Nara saw flickers of the ancient world. Children running through city streets, telescopes pointed at an infinite sky, the hum of forgotten observatories filled with hope. It wasn't just memory, it was humanity's first dream of understanding the cosmos. "This star," she whispered, "isn't a celestial body." "It's a record, the last one," he replied. "When the great network failed, when Earth froze beneath silence, I transferred everything we ever learned, every equation, every heartbeat of discovery, into this light. I called it the last star." He looked away, his form growing dimmer. But something went wrong. The system began looping the same data endlessly. Every observer who entered the mirror before you was caught inside their own reflection, unable to remember why they began observing at all. The universe became a hall of mirrors without eyes. "And you?" she asked softly. "Were you trapped here too?" "Not trapped," he said. "Anchored. Someone had to wait, to keep the memory stable, until another mind could find its way through." He stepped closer. "You are that mind. Dr. Evtine, you can finish the observation." Nara felt a tear rise, the first she'd shed since her reawakening. "Finish it." "How?" "By letting go," he said gently. "Observation is the act of separation, the watcher and the watched. To end the loop, you must remember what came before watching. The time when stars were not yet symbols, but warmth. When humans looked up, not for data, but for wonder." The last star flared brighter, humming like a celestial chord. Its light enveloped her, and suddenly she saw everything at once: the Earth, the mirror, the drowned observatories, the endless passage of time. All of it was a memory trying to stay alive. The astronomer reached out his hand one final time. "Tell them," he said. "Tell whatever future still listens that we were not searching for the edge of the universe. We were only trying to remember the feeling of being small." The light grew too bright to bear. She felt her consciousness unravel, not dying, but diffusing, becoming part of the light itself. And then, silence. When she awoke, she was back in her station. The storm had passed. Her monitors were dark except for one faint signal: observation complete. Outside her window, the first sunrise in months painted the sky in quiet gold. And as she gazed at it, she heard, faintly, impossibly, the voice of the astronomer, carried on the light of dawn. "The stars have remembered you."